public speaker, so let me do it fast before I start sweating. Thank you all so much for coming here tonight, coming out to this Tema Literary Salon. I'm Maureen Burdock, and I am co-owner of Tema Ideas in Print, together with Cynthia Green over there in the back. We provide services of all kinds. Anybody who needs illustration, graphic design, editing, or writing services. And many of our clients are wonderful book people, authors and small publishers. And so we, about a year ago, had the idea of doing a literary salon once a month, approximately, more or less, and having some of these wonderful people that we work with and we're in different organizations with come together as pairs and talk to each other and invite conversation with their audience. So that's what you're experiencing here tonight. Surprise at the very end, and I'm not allowed to say what it is. So you must stay for the surprise. And I'm going to let Cynthia Green introduce our two wonderful writers tonight. Thank you.
I have just recently met both Malka and Barbara. And I met Barbara in the organization called PEN New Mexico, which is a chapter of PEN USA and PEN International, which does work regarding writers' rights around the world. And it also has what's called the Cities of Asylum program that offers asylum to a writer who is endangered in their country of origin and brings them to a city in the United States and offers them asylum and support for a couple of years until they can make it on their own or go where they want to go. And Barbara was part of PEN, and PEN also had a literary contest last year, the PEN Southwest Book Awards. Barbara was the nonfiction judge, rightly so, when I let you know what her credentials are, for those of you who don't know. And the books she was judging was White Fire by Malka Drucker. Now, Malka is no neophyte writer. She's authored 20 books, among them children's books, biographies. She's done books with photographer Gay Block, and Gay also did the photographs in White Fire. And the book is about portraits of contemporary women spiritual leaders. And there is also, I believe, a retreat that was called the White Fire Retreat, which brought together many of these leaders, including Marianne Williamson and Joan Halifax Roshi here in Santa Fe, and many, many others. And they are the portraits that are represented in the book. Somewhat simultaneously, in terms of literary events, Barbara Tedlock published a book called Woman in the Shaman's Body, which is, from an anthropological point of view, women as spiritual leaders in the historic and prehistoric records. And she has this incredible book with documentation and photographs about women shamans, both contemporary, such as in Mongolia today, and prehistoric. And so I thought, what a conversation. What a conversation. Shamans of the past, prehistoric past, and Barbara is a professor of anthropology in Buffalo, New York, and she's the author of 4 or 5 books, many, many essays. She and her husband, Dennis Tedlock, are myologists, if that's the correct expression, renowned, and put that together, put that depth of knowledge together of prehistory, anthropology, about women and religion and spiritual practice, with the woman who's written the book about contemporary women in spiritual practice. And then we can talk about where to go, who we are as spiritual people, what kind of influence we can have on culture and religious or non-religious culture today. So I am very excited to introduce these women, and I think first they will have a conversation that they have prepared themselves, perhaps a question and answer, maybe a little reading, and then they'll open it up to you, and I hope you won't be shy at all about asking them questions, challenging them if you're so inspired, and welcome Barbara Tedlock and Rabbi Malka Drucker.
Was that fun? Yes. Well, I would first of all really like to thank all the powers that be at FEMA for being so inspired to have us come together. I have personal gratitude because when I read Barbara's book, I just knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, which was to be a shaman rabbi. Barbara and I have just made a deal that I'm going to initiate Barbara and Dennis into my tribe, and she's going to initiate me into hers.
Yeah, I'm planning to come to the Seder next month.
Right. Yes.
Okay. We're new at conversing with each other, but we like it. So this should be fun. Women and spirituality is very central to both of us, and we're both involved in it. We're both deeply practitioners of spirituality, and very interested in women affirming rituals of all kinds, and of a world in which women are leaders, and particularly in the spiritual realm. This has been one of the hardest areas for women to actually be accepted in. We were talking about this the other day. It's easier to get into the medical profession. You still have problems, but it's easier. To be involved in spirituality really shocks a lot of people for women to be involved. There's something so deeply androcentric about so many spiritual ideas in the world that both Malka and I have experienced. What it's like to be considered, oh, they're into spirituality?
Well, you know, Barbara, one of the most charming things that I uncovered was in speaking to a Unitarian minister, Helen Cohen, who's in my book. And Helen conducted a study among her colleagues asking specifically about, I'm sorry, there's sort of a wide span here, about gender and what congregants, and what congregants wanted in a spiritual leader, how they felt about women ministers, and what she concluded after all of this is that qualities like being a good listener, being approachable, understanding, sensitive, in short, many of the qualities that we recognize as qualities you might find in women are what congregants wanted in their male ministers.
And don't get as often as they want. Right. So it's interesting that way, in that the whole idea of nurturing, sharing power, sharing spirituality, not being the center of attention, all of that works so beautifully in spirituality and in healing. And these are very strongly feminine characteristics. The power of being the center of attention, being the mediator, being the important person connecting sky and earth and so on. This is a very different kind of feel than the feel within the feminine practices. Both of us are involved in spiritual traditions that are very well known to be masculine or masculinized. So it's interesting, and I've run into a lot of problems with male shamans, and it's fascinating to see, because they believe that what they do is correct, and what any other form of practice in which you share power and is incorrect. It's not true shamanism. True shamanism is you're the center of attention and you heal people. No, that's not true shamanism.
Well, I've had problems with male rabbis.
I'm so surprised, no?
Especially tall male rabbis. I think it's, as we had said before, that if you go back to the very root of how human beings encountered spirit, the earliest traditions really revered the feminine for the simple reason that the vessel in which the women inhabit reflects creation and nurturance. So it would be natural if you open up the first book of Genesis, the first page, and what is it about? It's about the one who gives birth. It's about the Creator. And as every tradition has either hungered in its fear of being overcome by others, to be conquered, or in fact has real threat from the outside, it turns more and more to Papa to sort of take care of things, and turns away from the feminine. And I think that this is reflected even in communities, that each community is, I've had my share of interviews, I've had my share of going around to so-called mainstream regular congregations, and what I found is that many congregations, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but it's sort of like, they were willing to have me as their mistress forever, but to call me their consecrated leader was a very different story. That took tremendous courage for them to say, this is our rabbi. I still get phone calls all the time about there are wedding planners here in Santa Fe, and they need a rabbi. But every time they need a rabbi, they have to check it out, make sure, well, we have a rabbi, she's a woman. And Barbara and I were saying, what is the deal? It's true that now we've broken many ceilings, and you can have a woman lawyer, you can have even a woman pilot, you can have women doctors. You can believe in the divine feminine, no problem. Read the Da Vinci Code, it's doing very well. People have no trouble with that either. But the minute they hear there is a woman that is here on the ground who is carrying that power of the divine feminine, no thank you. That just seems to be too frightening. And I'm not exactly sure what that's about.
Yeah, combining the pragmatics and the earthiness with the spirituality seems to be forbidden to us women, and that's exactly what we do perfectly. Which I'm not surprised that what would be forbidden to us is what we do well at. I've noticed that a lot. But that combination is a natural and works very powerfully. And all of the women spiritual leaders I know, and I loved reading Malka's interviews. I was so excited. I'd agreed to judge these books. I had 3 books, and I unfortunately read the other 2 first, and I was sort of depressed. And then I picked up Malka's book, and it was wonderful, and I got very excited because I saw that there are many women leaders out there in the world in spirituality who can talk to the same problems I've had. And you keep thinking, well, it's a problem I'm having, or it's a problem of my congregation or my people, and the word shaman has the word M-A-N in it, man, and then guys have decided that it's a really masculine thing, and in fact, the image of the shaman is at the core of the men's movement. So, it's a whole problem for me. But they'll be quiet and listen for a little while, but I don't think they want me to become too central in any way, because I give my power away. That's how I'm empowered, is I get power and I give it away. And they find this very frightening. the sharing of power and knowledge and spirituality. You can't heal people who don't know something about healing themselves. And that's what I try to do, is I try to help people, bring them up in a spiritual way so they can be involved in their own healing process. A lot of guys don't like that. A lot of shamans want you just lie down, shut your mouth, and I'll do the whole thing. It's, it's wow. It's like this big performance. It's like Western allopathic medicine, in which the doctor healer comes into the room. And I've been in a lot of shamans conferences. I was just in one in January, in which I saw a lot of these guys who do that. I'm it. And people sit there, sometimes pleased and sometimes uncomfortable, not knowing what's going on. But then I get up and I talk, and I'm too down to earth, and I have a sense that that's a problem. That I've embodied spirituality and made it too earthy, if anything. Do you have that feeling?
Well, Barbara, one of the things that I actually, in my copy of your book that's heavily annotated by me, is that what I was very struck with was the idea that the power of the shaman in some way comes from the one who sits before you, who looks to you and trusts, and this alchemical experience happens where that part and that one recognizes your essential power and offers you the opportunity in that trust to express it. And you sitting there with them, recognizing their space for your power, also bring forth their power of healing within them. Now we go back to the gender issue, if you will, that if women are again and again deprived of this power that they have because the one who sits before you says, you can't do it. And you've been told this forever, and you've been told this, within a culture, not only as an individual. That's part of the sickness of our society. And so, again, one of the women in the book, Marianne Williamson, was saying, this is not about supplanting one energy for another. It's about a balancing of energy. And the title of the book, White Fire, came, actually I thought that I had read this somewhere. And then when I really asked a bunch of scholars, and then I asked a bunch of male scholars, to tell me where it was written, and nobody could find it, I guess I made it up. But what I think it is a conflation of a few ideas. That you all know that the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, is written on parchment, black ink, special ink, and each panel of writing is not the same. It's not like a book that some pages are written in poetry, and there are different patterns. And there is in the Talmud the phrase, the cryptic phrase, that Torah is black fire written upon white fire. So when I read that, I always have thought that, whoa, maybe there are 2 stories. We can read the black. Maybe the white, first of all, you can never read the black without the white, but maybe the white is a whole other story, and the reason we're in so much trouble is that we only have half the story. The rabbis had said that the white was the feminine. What does that mean? We don't know exactly. But it is perhaps the idea, and then it became a perfect metaphor for this book of all these women spiritual leaders, because they too were not seen. It was only the black stories that were being read. We really weren't getting the other side of the feminine space of the divine. And it seems to me that the shaman represents the ultimate opportunity for 2 human beings to bring forth the divine in this healing power. The minute you say woman shaman, I mean, the good thing about shaman is that you don't have shamaness, and you don't have rabbis. Because ultimately, of course, all of this transcends gender.
Exactly. Right. It's definitely beyond gender, and it is a form of spirituality that puts together the masculine with the feminine. The most powerful thing of all is when you can combine in yourself both energies. That is the hoped for ideal. Shamans, when they're trained, whether they're male or female, in tradition after tradition that I know firsthand, are encouraged and expected to work on if they're male, their feminine side, if they're female, their masculine side, to try to bring them up to some kind of balance, because they see that the world should consist of both. If you look at flowers are androgynous. There's a whole set of imagery in shamanism around flowers, and the ideal of being both genders is very important. So the white fire and the black fire. I think I should have read your book first, because I should have figured out that title would tell me that something interesting was going on here. But that's fine that I read it last, because then I was really happy after being somewhat distressed. It's very hard to judge books, and I'm sure you've been a judge too. It's very hard, if you're a writer, to try to be fair to other people's work and to try to figure out what's going on. But all I can tell you is when you know something definitely the way I knew right away about the White Fire book, you just know. I mean, you know that you didn't make it out. You know that you're not playing favorites. I had never met Malka, even though she lived in Santa Fe, or anything. And I just said, oh my God. And what was so brilliant about the book is not only who she interviewed, but the fact of who she was. And that the conversations, the dialogues were there. And so you saw two spiritual leaders at all times. Not this monologue, not this Adamic figure, but a dialogue, something that's more blended, more complicated than that. And I think that's what's so brilliant about the book. And I heard from Malka that that's what people were not that happy about. Was it the publisher?
The Publishers Weekly, that's exactly that. If the author had just not been intruding her voice, it would have been a much better book.
The reason the book is brilliant is that there's a spiritual leader talking to other spiritual leaders. I mean, wow. And you sometimes wonder, I wonder who that was for publishing.
An atheist.
Anyway, the field of women in religion is a huge and wonderful field. And I was just in California at the California Institute for Integral Studies doing some talks, and they have a whole course in the feminine divine. There are people getting PhDs in this track of the feminine divine. I'd never heard of that before. And I thought, gee, I went to UC Berkeley, hey, we didn't get anything like that when I went to school. But you can, if you go to the California Institute of Integral Studies, you can study something like the feminine divine. So when I was speaking, it was an audience, and about half of the audience were in that track. And I was scared, because I thought, oh my God, these are people who are specializing in this, and they know much more than I do, because they're reading about it, thinking about it, they're interviewing people, and oh, here I go. Let's see if I know enough. And so I just talked about what I knew about, and I talked about Northern California, which is the heartland of the feminine divine. In Northern California, there were about 360 different Native American tribes, and there are many fewer today. And what's so interesting about that area of the nation is that most of the shamans were female and are female to this day. So it's an interesting kind of story. And it turns out that the California Institute of Integral Studies, they know that. The students have studied it, and there was a very famous woman shaman known as Essie Parrish from there, a Pomo person, and she did wonderful films and various things. But the feminine divine as a topic of study, I just find heavenly, and I can't figure out where else. Does anybody know where else? Have you ever heard of a feminine? Yes.
Well, sadly, the course got canceled because not enough people knew about it and did it. But UNM offered an extended university at the community college on the Divine Feminine in Art and Literature by PhD woman artist from town, whose name I can't remember, but I have the syllabus. We had the first night, we had slides, it was just going to be this fabulous course, and not enough people signed up, and they canceled it at the end of the first week. But if you want to know about it, I'm going to get in touch with this woman. I said, if they had done an article in the paper about this, you would have, I mean, we only had to have 8 people, and we didn't get 8 people by the first week. So this is something that it looked like she had really worked out a wonderful course, and she was well qualified to teach it, and it was a UNM course. And seniors apparently can take a UNM course for $15, one course, if you're over 65. So, you know, like the $500 fee was not going to keep some other people from taking it. So I'm going to look at
How recent was this?
this semester.
Oh,
I mean,
right
no,
now,
this
because I
was
keep thinking this is
January.
what used to happen.
No, this is like January. I signed up for the class, and 3 people came the first night, and we didn't get enough people, and by Friday they canceled it.
Let's get her to give it elsewhere. We'll
Yeah.
sign up.
Yeah, well, I will try to get it in the newsletter. I'll get the information from her, but she was so disappointed. She had worked out the whole syllabus, and, you know, she had it all prepared for us that first night. So, not to take away from y'all, but it is being done even here, and it's so convenient. I just mean, like, you know, you don't have to go to Northern California.
You know what's really amazing to me about this, Barbara, is that when we first started researching women spiritual leaders, I could have just like plunked myself in the Bay Area and gotten every woman in the book. So there must be something about sacred space or sacred ground up there, because I'm talking about, you know, from Methodists to witches to urban priestesses, they were all in Northern California. So that it really is, the tradition continues in that way. So.
Yeah. Between Buffalo and Toronto is something known as the Wiccan Corridor. It's the largest number of Wiccan practitioners in the nation. It's bigger than all of California for all the Wiccan traditions, and it also has the largest Druidic. I have a student, Beth Savage, who's doing a PhD dissertation on Druidry and the feminine divine within the Druid tradition, because the Druid tradition is a little bit dicey. It has an awful lot of masculine oppression built right into that pagan religion. And a lot of people who would find themselves in the Druid path prefer the Wiccan path because it's a stronger, more feminine, affirming path. So California is great and maybe crazed and spiritual. And I really enjoyed it last week. But we have some, and there are other things happening in other places as well. One thing I've always wanted to ask you, how many women rabbi are there?
There are actually, Barbara, there are a lot. I am reasonably convinced that there's a tacit affirmative action in seminaries today, that if they didn't have affirmative action, they'd be 80% women.
Really? Interesting.
I think that it's funny how it always has a few more male students than female, but I think it really is. And of the women rabbis, only a handful, it's what we call the stained glass ceiling. But I would still say, though, this is something you and I had spoken about, that one of the reasons that as you know, I wanted to write this book was, as a woman rabbi, I didn't feel, to use that wonderful word, womanist, that there was not a womanist energy within the rabbinate among women, that there was still so much following of the male pattern. So I just have to tell you all that so Gay and I today went out and I decided to have a robe made for high holidays. See, what I've been wearing until now is that if you go to you need a robe for high holidays, and to do weddings. If you're a Reform rabbi, you wear a robe for everything, even when you're talking to 2-year-olds. But I'm not of that tradition, but I have to wear a robe occasionally. And when you need a robe, you call somebody like Jay Levine, who's a retailer in New York, and then Jay Levine orders your robe from some house that provides robes for Episcopal priests. It's not Jewish, it's not feminine, I look like an altar boy in this robe. But I think I was inspired by tonight, Barbara. I'm going out, we're going to get like a really fabulous, powerful girl robe. I'm going to stand up there in a robe that no man would ever wear. It's going to have that power. So I think that what I decided was that I would go out and really see among the sisterhood of women spiritual leaders of all stripes. The other thing was, the great thing about being a writer is, my first book was about baseball, and I realized Tom Seaver, who was a guy I wrote about, that he would be long retired, I would still be writing. His knees would have gone, but I would write for a long, long time. And I just realized that the greatest thing about being a writer is that anything you're curious about, you could be really nosy and you could ask all these questions. So now, I as a rabbi could go out and I could talk to witches. I could talk to Episcopalians. Well, the problem with this is that I've never met a religion I don't like. Every time I would go out, I would come back and say, that's what I want to be. Whatever it was, that's what I wanted to be. But really what I was looking for was some help in gaining my power. I realized after reading your book and this difficulty fundamentally, what is this? It's not just political. It's within myself. It's a lack of faith within my own power to do this. And when I was first ordained, I served in a local community here. They're very nice people, regular kind of place, they sort of, everybody, really all very nice people. And I would talk to people that I had otherwise would have never been in any relationship with, like people who were on boards of institutions like this. And I would sit there with them. And I would find them incredibly difficult, and then I would just sit, and maybe because I was called to do this work, I really found myself looking at them and loving them. I would be watching myself in this place and thinking, son of a gun, this stuff really works, this is amazing. And in that place, I would see transformation in them. And then I realized when I started doing White Fire, what it was is I was casting a spell. This is like, what I hadn't learned yet to do is how to cast it for a long time, and long enough, till they got to the board meeting and voted, and really cast it for a short period of time. But it really was in meeting all these women, but especially the women who had stepped far outside mainstream traditions, women who weren't hampered by the male tradition. Women, Wiccans, for example, Starhawk. Really. But then what I found is that even the nuns were inventing new religion. Even the women that I interviewed who were right in the mainstream were doing it totally differently. Even the ones who were most archly conservative, they couldn't help it. Just by their very nature of being women spiritual leaders, they were stepping into a new realm. So I found that to get back to your initial question, that women rabbis are really wonderful and they're fine, and many of them all get together and they talk to each other, but they're really not stepping into, again, that notion of what does it mean to really speak from this new place and believe in it as the oldest place there ever was.
That's really very major. And we've been talking about we'd like to maybe do a conference on women and spirituality, maybe in about a year here in Santa Fe, in which we would bring to Santa Fe a lot of these powerful spiritual leaders. So women in spirituality of all different types of spirituality, and perhaps get something like on public television or something of that sort, because it's like a huge underground, it's like a swell. I feel it all the time. It's enormous, and it's just coming up. It's like a tsunami. It's starting up the edge, but yet a lot of people don't even know it's there, and a lot of people who would be helped by knowing this, empowered by it, don't know where to find it, don't really understand. They don't understand it could be in their own religion, whatever religion it is. My husband and I lecture on cruise ships a lot. We're Mayanists, we're specialists on Maya, so we take people down to the Caribbean, And we always, the first couple of years we did it, we would always get really kind of sick to our stomachs when we would look out at the audience the first night. You lecture in these big rooms to about 750 people. And you would look out and you would see about 20 nuns dressed in the most conservative habit you could imagine. And I thought, uh-oh, they don't want to hear about the Maya. They don't want to hear about Mayan spirituality. Why in the world are they on this cruise? And we learned that we were wrong. They wanted to hear about it. They were open, I mean, incredibly open, and incredibly spiritual about it. And they were on the cruise for a reason. It wasn't just sightseeing. And so we have changed in our attitude. If you're deeply ensconced in one particular tradition, and if you're truly deeply, you are open to them all. You become just completely wide open. You don't become a fundamentalist. You become an interspiritual person. And there's a new journal called Elixir that's just appeared, and it's a journal that centers on interspirituality, that makes the argument for, it's the Sufi order that's in New Lebanon, New York, are the publisher of this. And it's really interesting. They had one issue, they're about to have a second. And the argument is very simple, and that is that if you are grounded in something, you know something very well, you are open to all the other things that are nearby. I think that's why Malka and I are so interested in each other's traditions, because we're grounded within particular things, but then we want to know more. So I learned a lesson, lecturing on cruise ships, that I had a bias, because my background is Roman Catholic, and I had a bias about the fact that Roman Catholics would not accept what I would say about Mayan shamanism and spirituality, and I was wrong.
Well, I'm really, I'm very glad to hear that, because actually one of the things that I encountered in working White Fire, especially when I went into what, sort of the New Age, human potential religions, like Jean Houston, for example, in her mystery school, which is wonderful. But I was challenged constantly. Like, I mean, even people like, Beatrice Brutones, okay, Beatrice, said to me, what's the deal with your being so Jewish? Wow. I mean, it all goes to the same place. Why do you have to, get over this? You're like, why don't you embrace everything, And so that would always stop me for a few days, and I sort of, and I wrote in the introduction in the book that often my faith path feels like my wedding ring. Sometimes it's really heavy, monogamy is a hard gig. And yet I also have come to a place in my life where I feel that I scarcely know enough about my own tradition, and I can't know about all, and I also know that you can dig a lot of shallow wells in your life, and you're never going to really get where you need to get. And it's only now that, just last night, for example, you all, I'm sure, since you're here tonight, knowing who you all are, noticed the moon. And it's just dropped dead. You got this full moon. And Barbara and I just discovered that both in the Mayan tradition and the Jewish tradition, that it is recognized as the 13th or the 14th day of the month, because it's the full moon, again, following the lunar pattern. And last night, we celebrated Purim, and this is a holiday that can be seen as frankly misogynistic. And yet, because so many, again, women, I guess the other thing is that in my moments of despair, I have to really look at this as drops of rain, little by little. There really has been there's been a sea change, Barbara, in 25 years, the number of women spiritual leaders across the board, your book, my book, this wouldn't have existed 25 years ago. But, so now we really see, somebody like Esther, Queen Esther, as you know, Queen Esther really, she slept with the enemy. And in the 70s, I remember when I first encountered this, and I thought, oh my God, how could she be a hero of anything that she... But no, she is ultimately using everything that she's got in the society in which she lives to win the day. Women are not supposed to be the warriors. They're not supposed to be the conquerors. She, in fact, was the one who conquers evil in this story. And I think that it's profound when you say, you reach deeply into one tradition to learn it, to recognize. I mean, our religion cannot be womanism. Our religion cannot be mysticism. We find whatever faith path we have, recognize like this is our family, and our family has its flaws, God knows, and it's no better than anybody else's family, but it is the place where we find shelter and keeps us warm. And as you say, the better we find ourselves in security in that place, we can, with great curiosity, respect, and affection, learn from the other, because if I recall, shaman means one who knows, and you can't know too much.
Exactly. 25 years ago, her book and my book could not have been published. I would say even 5 years ago is borderline whether it could be published. The fight I had with the agent that my husband and I had for many years about my book was really unbelievable. I presented to a guy who already knew me and I had a good track record of publishing my book idea about women shamans and whatnot. He looked me dead in the eye and he says, "There are no women shamans, you're a liar." I said, "Excuse me?" He knew better than I did, And he says, "No," he says, and he had studied, he'd gone to school, he'd read Mircea Eliade, et cetera. And he just told me they don't exist, frankly. I said, "Well, I'm sorry," and I began to tell him. And he says, "No," he says, "you're deluding yourself. You're delusional." Okay? And this is in the last 5 years. So that's why I'm saying this is radical, what Malka and I accomplished, but yet there's so much more to accomplish, like what you said about the course. You couldn't get enough people in it. The word isn't out yet. It isn't known but it will be. I mean, it takes a certain amount of effort. I was at Harvard at the Divinity School for a year. They have a Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. And what's interesting about shamanism is that a world religion or not? Big debate. And could it be? I mean, it doesn't have, it's not like monotheism, it doesn't have a single key deity, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a whole arguments about shamanism, and the whole notion there was that it was a primitive religion, and if it was a religion at all, a belief system, and that it was connected to game animals, and that it was of no use today, basically. So I spent a year living in what's called God's Motel, which is the housing next to the Div School in Cambridge. It was the most god-awful housing we've ever had in our lives. It was this Bauhaus modern, but it was badly designed, very uncomfortable. And I thought, of course, it would have to be uncomfortable. But I learned a great deal about how Harvard University, how the Div School teaches religion. And I'm horrified. I'm really horrified. They kill a beautiful topic. I think in time they may open up, things may happen, but there's no spirituality left in Harvard. I mean, the whole divinity school that's training all these people have killed the spirituality, as far as I could tell. And that's very sad. And they've killed that, and they've also killed the whole feminine power, the feminine divine, just completely, And not innocently, I think self-righteously.
It's interesting when you say that. Where I go with it is that, like Islam, Judaism reveres study. And what we've seen is, it's not just at Harvard. At Jewish Theological Seminary, which is like the Harvard of Jewish studies, the approach is academic, rational, and lacking imagination for the spirit. This is an institution that trains rabbis and often destroys simple faith in that process. So what I'm thinking now is that when I begin to study, I always say a prayer before. I'm also encouraged to study as the way you and I are now over a table talking about an idea, because the notion is it's not just you and me who's here. There's other energies afoot. So it's very interesting because I think that in Judaism, again, I frankly was completely ignorant of shamanism except as a literary idea until I read your book, and then it was like you said, why didn't I read this book before I wrote mine? But I realized that in many ways that what my tradition has encouraged is the holiness of knowing, so that you don't have that dualism, you don't have that split, and where the spirit is present in the thrill of sharing and birthing an idea with another. And so I think that in some ways that yet it's ironic that even in seminaries they often overlook this. And again, you and I talked about writing is a great opportunity as a tool to revision ideas by using different language. I still struggle with calling some things masculine, some things feminine. I do know this, that at these institutions like JTS, I went up there like just thrilled to death because this was the place of such powerful learning and so many amazing scholars had come out of it. And it really was the heart of darkness. I mean, it was like so hierarchical and so, it's this way and it's not this way. Is it coincidence that almost every teacher there is male? I don't know. I'm not, who knows? But
Yeah, the big problem I had, you have to present your ideas, you have to give lectures and whatnot, and interact at the Center for the Study of World Religions, and I realized I was really out of my water completely because there was nobody who did anything as weird as what I do. And people would ask me questions like, is suffering at the heart of this religion? And I would say, first of all, it's not a religion. And they, okay, is suffering at the heart of this practice? I'd say, well, actually, joy and bliss. And maybe if you say there has to be a heart, maybe that's where the heart is. And they would on and on and on, they would ask questions. They always ask, what is the male role? Over and over again. I thought that men didn't know that they were male. They were kind of, they were the norm, and then there were women. Okay, but I found at Harvard these guys knew they were male, and so they wanted to always know anything I did. They would interrupt me with, well, how did the men shaman do it? They wouldn't even let me get finished with describing how the women shaman did a particular thing. It was a fascinating struggle. To give my talks and to realize that it was so shocking. Everything I was saying was just, and also they were very well educated and they knew a lot about Eliada and about Chicago, and they talked about what was going on there. And what they didn't like about it, about what I was doing, and I was talking about birth, blood, afterbirth, and life. And I was told over and over again, you're not talking about shamanism. I don't know what you're talking about, lady, but it's not shamanism. And because they have been trained that shamanism is death to rebirth, and that's what it's all about. And if you look at the traditional images of shamans and whatnot, you look at scapula, bones, all this death imagery, and that's why they kept taking me back to suffering, death, and wanting shamanism to be born out of this. And I would say, but wait a minute, there's all this other stuff on the other side. There's all this imagery of flowers and birthing and weaving and butterflies and, all this, and all this menstrual symbolism. Let me tell you, say that word, the red flag goes up. It was very difficult for me.
well, yes.
This is the person who wrote Went White Fire with you and heard a lot of these interviews. I wanted to ask you, in the way that you might be being interviewed, what's been your experience as a woman rabbi of a group here that you think is different from if this group had been had a man at the helm?
Yeah.
Or just what's your experience been, either way?
I think that the first difference was that it took a village to encourage me to believe I could do it. I think if I had been born male, maybe from the time I was like shooting off my mouth when I was 5 years old, somebody might have said, "Why don't you become a rabbi?" And nobody said that, oddly enough, when I was 5 years old when I was growing up. So I think that, first of all, one major difference is that it took me a while to believe. I mean, I was 50 when I finally went to the seminary. So that's one difference. The second difference is that in creating this community, there are these things as a woman, you know, like, first of all, what do you wear? See, it's much easier if you're a guy. And what are people going to call you? That's the other difference, is that people always call male rabbis rabbi, or unless they're 20 years younger than you are. And from the beginning, I was Malka. Now, interestingly, I'm called rabbi much more now than I was when I first began, and I like it. I do. I like it not because it makes me feel taller. That's but it gives me a sense that there is, in fact, it's what we were talking about, Barbara, that there is Malka and there is also rabbi. There is both, and that it's my responsibility to believe in both. That, first of all, and maybe if I were a male rabbi, I would have trouble being Malka to the same people, and maybe as Malka, I had more trouble stepping into the place of being rabbi to my people. The community, I feel, is very intimate. I find that people from the beginning have shared their truth with one another very freely. I think part of this is that there is a predominance of women in our community. That's true in any faith group, and I always feel that the men that I see in these rooms and the men that I see in this room tonight, I don't know all of you, but I know you're good because you get something. What you're getting is that a group of women will speak differently, like a group of men will speak differently, but there's going to be a certain heart that's going to be spoken. And in our community, I really feel that heart gets spoken a lot. People really share their joys and concerns in ways that just astonish me. They take care of each other. I'm not going to say that it would be so radically different if it were a man doing this, but I am a mother, and I am a grandmother, and I know that there is in me a way of being with this group, that I hold this group in a way that I held my family. And there may be some of that creates a different atmosphere. I mean, again, in Judaism, the language is, you call the place where you gather the house of study, the Beit Midrash. And it really does feel like a house. So I'm very grateful for that part of the community. I'm grateful to see members of the community here tonight. They might be able to offer their perspective of what difference it makes to them. But I do know that I did ask in the beginning, especially the men in the community, what difference does it make to you? And because that's how I started this whole journey. I knew that the first community I had, we got new members because I was there, and we lost members because I was there. And people came in like, what kind of a tradition is this? I mean, what's a woman rabbi? Like, you just don't, even in a liberal tradition, you don't have the authority. So, and I found that there were actually, the men in our community said, we wouldn't step foot in a synagogue, but we will step foot at St. Bede's, because that's where a community meets. Because it's different, and we think it's different because a woman is at the head of it. So it's hard for me to say exactly what the difference is. Maybe you can do better than that. Because you always tell me after I've done something like this, why didn't you say that?
Okay, should we open it for questions in general? Yeah. Yes.
I have a question for the both of you. There's an anthropological definition of shamanism, and I think that's what you were up against, perhaps. And maybe you could talk about that and what your perception, both of you, what is your perception? What is a shaman? How do both of you relate to that?
I'll start. The concept of shaman, it's a foreign word, it's not an English word. It's from Evenki, which is a Siberian language, and it simply translates, as Malka says, the one who knows. And in fact, the word for these leaders in language after language around the world can be retranslated as the one who knows, the knowledgeable person, or as the person who drums or dances or some particular thing about the practice of the shaman, okay? And shamans are people who connect themselves to the natural world and are involved in healing and themselves and other people everywhere that I know that shamans exist. Shamanism as a concept is a problem. It's like all these other isms where it's a constructed concept, and it was constructed by anthropologists, and they wanted to say that shamanism is a particular spiritual practice that only exists in Central Asia and Siberia, and it may have come across the Bering Strait. Many Native Americans don't like this hypothesis. May have come across the strait down into the Americas, but that's it. It's nowhere else. Okay, and that was the original kind of definition of shamanism, and they had certain ideas about what a shaman does, and it made it very primitive. It really didn't. The definition didn't help shamanism live in the modern world. Then a bunch of other scholars came along and they said, wait a minute, it exists everywhere. It's on all the continents of the world. If you look at the actual practices, and if you get rid of this whole diffusionist idea that there was a core where shamanism was and it's most authentic and then whatnot. So if you get rid of that, then it could be everywhere. But there was another definitional problem, and that is that a shaman goes on a journey outside their body, and that anybody who doesn't do that is not a shaman, and that anybody who brings spirits in, which would be most of the feminine shamanic traditions on earth, all of the black traditions on earth, voodoo, all of candomblé, all of those religions that embody spirits into their body were thrown out of shamanism. So it's interesting that by kind of cutting things up in certain ways, you can get rid of people. And you got rid of women, because women in shamanism all over, they're just called mediums, and they're possessed mediums and all this other stuff, which is garbage, because most of the shamans you can meet do both. They travel and they bring spirit in. And I don't know any that don't do a combination of that, maybe different degrees or at different times in their career or whatnot. So yeah, so the definition, I think, is a lot of what's hurted. But who makes definitions? Male scholars, right?
So Julie, this is what I'm gonna make this up. Because when I read Barbara's book, and I kept saying, yes, that's right. The first thing was with the one who knows, and of course with my mind, which is not Talmudic but still Jewish enough to knows what. And for me, ultimately, the closest word that I come to it in my tradition is sadiq, which is literally translated as the righteous one. And then Hebrew is a very concentrated language, so there are a lot of other associations to it, including the word tzedakah, which is the word for giving to others, known as charity in English. But charity is connected to the word caritas, which has to do with feeling. But you see, this has to do with righteousness. So the one who knows, to me, is, to mix metaphors, is like the Tao. It's the way. It's the isness. This is how things work. That's what the shaman is, the one who knows how things work. And the way they work is in the dialectic between love and justice. This is the balance, this is the righteous path, that to do what needs to be done in any given moment, which sometimes is not always milk and cookies. When we're talking about, oh, the feminine, the breast, oh, the soft, no. There's also the feminine like Kali in the Hindu tradition. There's also the feminine like Deborah, who is the warrior. The feminine, but ultimately the one who knows this. The bottom line, the tachlis, as we say in Yiddish, the end of it is, it's about love. The world was created in love. Creation came from this great urge, creative urge within, however we understand, the one who began all. And it began from this desire. And this desire is why we have ultimately connection to each other. This doesn't make me a good person that I feel this connection. What it is in those glimpses, because I don't always feel it, but when I feel connection, that there is inextricably interconnection between all beings. That to me is ultimately the shamanic vision. To feel that and to know that this whole gig is just one big classroom. We are in little spaceships we call our bodies, no matter what their form, and there's only one lesson, which is ultimately that survival depends upon our feeling this interconnection. And that rests between having justice and love in the world. So that's how I understand shamanism.
But it's also pragmatic knowledge. Shamans everywhere are the holders of tradition. And shamanism survived in the Soviet Union and in the post-Soviet world and in Mongolia because of the fact that the families chose, they choose which of their children seem to be destined to be trainable as shamans. It's a hereditary system. They chose them and sent them off to school, and they became MDs, they became lawyers, they became government officials. So for the 72 years that religion and spirituality was outlawed in the Soviet world, it stayed alive in the tradition. So these families trained their children secretly in shamanic sensibility, in the lore and whatnot. At the same time, they were in the medical school, they were learning other things. And so what happened was when it began to open up with Glasnost in '92, suddenly people stepped forward and said, I'm a shaman, this is my lineage, here's my mother and whatnot. And who were these people? They were the leaders. They were the most important theater directors. They were the most important government officials. I mean, it was incredible. So that's how shamanism was saved in the Soviet Union and in Mongolia. So when we go to Mongolia, Dennis and I are talking to people in universities, rectors and whatnot. I'm a shaman, here's my lineage, this is what I do, and they perform shamanism. They've reopened all the earth shrines all over the nation. But it took, this huge political thing for people to be able to come forward, but they had kept it alive. They got rid of drumming. The shaman's drum disappeared because you could hear it, the vibration in the earth. So they stopped drumming, and they did it in their gurs, their circular tents, at night, and with people they knew. They wouldn't let just anybody in the door, and they healed and whatnot. And they sent these kids to school, and they all became successful people. And so suddenly when there was liberation, they could step forward and present it to the world. And then they wanted it to be on television. We were there, the year was 1999, and they came forward and they wanted the television studios to open up and to see their shrines and to say, look, we're still here and whatnot. And people would interview these people. They said, but you're the rector of the university and you're a shaman. Because they had been, brainwashed that shamans were somehow ignorant or emotional or something. And how could they be a rector of the university? But they were.
You know, what's very interesting to me is I'm thinking again about the 60 or so odd women that we interviewed for White Fire, and how many of these women did, again, nobody said to them when they were little, why don't you grow up to become whatever, and that somebody like Joan Halifax here in town was a political activist who then discovered that something was wrong with always being in a place of acrimony and polemicism and basic disagreement, that this cannot be the way, that we're forever creating this dualistic thinking, and she ultimately became a Buddhist and then priest. We met other women who again had followed, one was an English professor, but was missing a major piece. But what I hear missing in these women is they did not have the lineage and the long tradition. They had to find it within themselves in midlife, their calling, and that what I would love to see in my lifetime would be that this generation of women spiritual leaders create, in fact, a lineage, the beginning of a lineage for other women to feel they can step into this place and not have to wait until they're, say, 40s before they really start to do the work.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I agree. That's what we need to do. Shamanism was saved in a second way. There's a second way that you can become a shaman. It doesn't have to be in a lineage, and that is you dream your way into it. And you have all kinds of connections in your dreaming and in lucid dreams and whatnot into shamanism. So there are a number of people in Siberia, all over, who dream their way into shamanism. What they do later, if they feel that somehow or another they need consecration, there are centers now all over Mongolia where you can present yourself as a dreamed shaman, and you can get some lessons, and you can talk to people out of lineages, and the lineages will kind of reinforce you, and that's what you're talking about. We need to have dreamed spiritual leaders.
Right, and you and I had just said before that there's a great need for celebration and celebration and celebration. Celebrating what? Again, my Jewish mind will run in that direction. To celebrate, again, opportunities for our essences to come forth. One of the things that I'm thinking of is that I have a group of women, 11 women, who have been studying for 18 months, both exoterically, which means in their 50s they were learning Hebrew, and also esoterically tracking why they came 18 months ago to our doorstep and said to me, basically, I'm clueless about why I'm here. In fact, I have one of my first bat mitzvahs in the room tonight, who definitely is still saying, I don't know what I'm doing here, Malka. And I decided, Carol, because of that I would actually, I've always wanted to do this. You know, I've done all these bar mitzvahs for kids. I think, in fact, I have a bar mitzvah mother here, one of her children. So many of these kids, and I've always wanted to do a vision question for these kids. You know, it's great that they can, you know, learn their Torah. You know, there are a few lines of Torah they can get up there, whatever, look good in their suit, and you know, have candy thrown at them. But what do they know? So I've always wanted to sort of take them out, you know, and terrify them in the woods and let them come back with some real information. So then I reached a certain age where I decided I really could no longer, you know, like really deal with 13-year-olds. There were many gifted people who could do this work, but I was no longer going to. One of the things that I sort of passed I decided my spirit animal was like moving more to the bear, the really old bear.
That's a powerful one.
Yeah, that was it. Forget the butterfly, I was really into the bear. So now I have these 11 women, and they are immensely disparate and have phenomenal energy. And we're going to go up to Ojo Caliente next week, and we're going to do a vision quest, mikvah, which is a ritual immersion. And they have come from many, many different paths to this place. And there is a place where many of them, 18 months ago, did not have any idea why they were doing this. Some of them felt perhaps they were cheated because their brothers had gotten something they hadn't gotten. Some of them had felt they had lost a parent and they wanted more connection to their root tradition. Many of them, and also in there being a group of 11 and supporting one another in this, have really come to some profound understanding of themselves. And since there is one of them in the room tonight, I'm not going to give away all the things we're going to do up there, Marge. I don't want to frighten you. So they are going to spend some time by themselves in the wilderness, and they're going to stay in one place for several hours, and they're going to write what they see in that place. And then they're going to come back, and I'm going to spend some time with them, and I'm going to listen and hear what they've seen. And as best I can receive it, tell them what I know about their lives in doing this. So it seems to me that rituals like this, at this stage of our lives, we should have with more frequency, because we know more, and we need to become partners to each other, because I certainly cannot see what's going on in my life as clearly as you might be able to, and I in yours. And that more and more as we can move into these places. And I think traditions can, each one of these different traditions, I think we need to serve as initiators to each other in bringing one another into such traditions.
Beautiful.
I'm going to include this alone. No, actually, when I was quite young, I was just intrigued by the spiritual world. I didn't know all that much about God, or, you know, I got a chance to experience different religions. Nothing really stuck with me at the time. I did have an idea about spirituality. Nobody said to me, do you want to be a shaman when you grow up? I don't know that I am or I'm not, but what my question, not necessarily needing an answer, is perhaps the reason that these things, that people come into this awareness in their 40s, it's a developmental thing. My daughter probably would have been along the shamanistic path, very spiritual, very connected. She was born knowing a whole other realm of existence, but at 16, or maybe if she made it to 20, I don't know that she would have the maturity and the insight and the other things that we gain as we get into middle age.
I think you're right about
You know,
that.
kind of. So that's just kind of something putting it out there. But I would have loved to have had or brought into my life earlier those mentors.
Right. Well, women shamans that I know around the world are sometimes chosen at birth, and sometimes they're chosen around the time of their first menstruation, and sometimes they're not chosen until they go into their menopause. And that's another gateway.
Yeah,
And shamans recognize it as a gateway. So maybe one can miss some of the other gateways, and that one can really affect one.
Well, you know, we just may need to gather more earthly experience or coming from other sources and be able to open up and recognize it. I wasn't really willing to open up and recognize, you know, I mean, really, I kind of thought I was crazy because I didn't have anybody else to affirm what I was feeling.
Well, that's again something that I heard from a lot of women spiritual leaders. And I mean, Halifax is great because she just says, well, you know, women, hell, we got nothing to lose. Nobody has any expectation of us to begin with. But she also talks about having very loving, supportive parents. I think that one of the things that Barbara and I really both feel tremendous missionary zeal about is creating a climate where young women, where children really are encouraged and taken seriously. This part that really, I mean, I feel very much now, I can hardly even talk about it at times because I'm just getting in touch with realizing that the very part of me that is my strength now was the part that was derided as a child. So I think that, and especially as girls, we really, really don't want women, we're already marginalized by our sex. What more? You know, if we also happen to be spiritual, God help us. Maybe that's what we started out with, you know. A person of faith is already in trouble, but a woman is really. But no, we should create a world that's going to recognize the gift of that.
Just one short comment and a question. I'm a know-it-all, but I'm not a shaman. I believe there's a distinction here. Well, my question to you, you mentioned before that people who are deeply spiritual are very open to other spiritual ideas. And could you comment on that in relation to Islam in the world today and the terrorism that we see?
No.
Well, I have a quick answer.
I've never seen a religion I don't like. I think that there's one of the women in my book is a Sufi. I have a great respect for Sufism, for many aspects of Islam. What we're seeing is manifestation right now of Islam. If this is Islam, I think many of us would have a very hard time sort of putting in the same category of, say, other faith paths.
Yeah, it doesn't. As some very strong Christian fundamentalism also, these very strong fundamentalisms that are arising today don't feel spiritual to me. They don't feel like religions. They feel like politics. And they feel like they're using religion to cover up what their real intent is the way I sense it.
That's okay, except what's the response of the moderate voice within that tradition? I mean, that's really, I know this, that when Baruch Goldstein, 10 years ago, Purim, went in and killed 50 Muslims praying in a mosque, that the chief rabbi of Israel said, this is not Judaism. So I want to hear more of that from within.
Yeah, the critique from within is necessary, I think, for there to be any change.
Well, I think it's very fitting you're in a bakery. This is about as sweet an evening as I've had in a long time. I want to ask a question, and I think, Barbara, it may be a little more directed to you, but Malka can jump in. There seems to be an urgency right now on the planet, right? We're all feeling that. And in that context, there is this sort of opening up of this shamanic information coming forth, indigenous peoples from around the world, or the Hopis, the people from, there are many teachers who are coming through who are shamanic traditions sharing their wisdom. And do you feel that there's a sufficient context now to be able to hold that? A lot of people go to weekend workshops or go to workshop and they get these shamanic techniques and then they go out in the world and start to do all kinds of things. And I guess, Barbara, I want to get your sense of, there's some sense of this kind of neo-shamanism and how to hold that in a way that feels respectful to the tradition, and yet we can utilize that knowledge now knowing how much it's needed at this time.
Right. People from shamanic traditions are speaking out in huge numbers, traveling in huge numbers, as they've never done before that I know of historically, okay? That is true. And it began to happen about 5 years ago. And it is the number of Mongolian shamans who want to travel. Many of them can't speak English. They need translators. They can't find enough translators. The urgency of people who are trained in the shamanic path to reach out is enormous. At the same time, there is the neo-shamanic path, which was created by an anthropologist, Michael Harner was his name. This is a guy that my husband and I have known for years. And about 1980, he had a best-selling book, The Shaman's Path. And he's created a little industry. And there are many split-offs, there are many kind of traditions that aren't quite the same, and so forth and so on. And I think it was very important that this be created in the West in the time in which it was. I'm just hoping that there's ecumenicism enough within the shamans' world that the Sangoma shamans who are coming from South Africa to speak to people, that the Mongolians and the Hopis are given the same courtesy and are given the same audience as the neo-shamans who've created their own tradition here out of bits and pieces of other people's traditions, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. Syncretism is at the core, I think. Now you hear me as a professor. answer. Okay, syncretism is a worldwide phenomenon. All religions are built off bits and pieces of other religions. No way to stop that. So neo-shamanism isn't bad because it does that. That's the religious underbelly of neo-shamanism, okay? And it's okay. But if they can show the courtesy to the actual trained, initiated shamans and not make the mistake and not have the hubris to say that I or my organization has reintroduced shamanism to these poor people who lost it. Anybody who says that is lying. And I come right out in public, I say this, and they know who they are, who are saying that my organization has reintroduced shamanism to places where it was being oppressed and so forth and so on. I've been to those places. Shamanism was there. Yes, they did talk to shamans, and guess what? Mongolians and Siberians are very nice people, and they allow you to talk, and they don't jump in and say, no, yes, our shamanism didn't disappear. No, you're not reintroducing it. You know, they don't do that. They're polite people. So that's my one little kind of problem with a lot of the neo-shamanic path is that they're too big for the britches. They think they have reintroduced something, and they have not.
Carol, the only thing I would add to this is that the time has come for all wise ones, not only to speak up, but especially women, and to also not be so polite, and to really sit out, to sort of look at the faces of others and say, bring forth that power within yourself. The time has come. We may not be midnight, but the 11th hour is really, really here. So,
One final question? Okay.
okay. Two final questions.
I'm just curious to know what you think about this phenomenon with the Da Vinci Code, and why is it that one book, and it's not the first time some of these concepts have been out, that for a certain period of time, I've never seen so many women reading the same book all over when I was traveling as this book, and what is happening from your perspective in your fields that is causing this sort of opening, this interest? Is it just the way this person writes, or is it the content? And what do you think some of the impacts are going to be from this? When the movie comes out, there's going to be more publicity.
It's interesting. When my book came out in 2003, and in May of that year, I was doing a book signing. I think I signed about 5 books that afternoon. The bookseller felt really sorry for me and said, you might be interested in this book that just came out. It's a good summer read. And it was the Da Vinci Code, and nobody had heard of it yet. By August, everybody in the world had read it. And when I read it, I enjoyed it. I found it very charming. I liked it a lot. And I thought, this is great because, this will be good for my book. And Divine Feminine is such a big deal, but it goes back to what I was saying before. The world is very easy with the Divine Feminine. The world is very easy with women lawyers. The world is not easy with, beings that are here walking the earth who carry the Divine Feminine. That's another story. And I think that, Dan, I have absolutely no idea why people are so in love with that book. I'm kind of clueless about why this is like touched this great spiritual moment. And I've read a lot about it too, social critics. And I haven't found anything that's really explained to me. The truth is, the book is a little bit of a masturbatory fantasy. And you get to the last chapter, and you think, oh no. So the thing is that I think that the idea of sex and spirit, it's like he does that really well, even better than John Donne, and people like that part of it, but I don't understand.
I'll let Malka's answer stand. I don't like the book. I couldn't even finish reading. Okay, we've got one more.
Yes, a question about women's spirituality in Judaism. Particularly in Orthodox circles, it's always said that the woman innately has spirituality within her, and she doesn't need to attend the minyan or do the practices that men do because she already has it. The woman is already spiritually arrived. Men have to work at it and go to the minions and study the Torah because men are imperfect. But yet, at the same time, when it comes time for the Shabbat dinner or the Seder, the women frequently are exhausted from all the cooking and all those things. I've had difficulty putting those two things together. And I don't know if you can speak to this.
Well, I use the rabbi for me on this one is the Dalai Lama. And Dalai Lama says, do what is useful. I like that word a lot, what's useful. So, Orthodox men can tell me forever that the reason I'm not counted in a minion is because I have more spirituality. But the fact is that on the ground, on this earth, I come out as a second-class citizen. It's like I don't have because there's no greater privilege than being able to pray. So I don't think it's useful because basically we've ended up with, really Torah is not misogynistic. But it's very hard to argue that the commentaries and the rabbis who did their commentaries on this don't put their spin on it. At the same time, I would also say that that we do know that women are much more adherent naturally. Women do move more towards the spirit. There is a big difference between men and women, and that in many ways in Judaism, I do love the deepest understanding of what the woman is. The woman, not the feminine, but the woman. The reason that the child is known to be Jewish through its mother, through that lineage, is because we do know that the mother really does make the house. So it really does, that really does fit. All that being said, that there is absolute frank misogyny within the tradition. There's no question about it. And that and then to deny it doesn't allow for correction of it. There are Orthodox feminists. I do not regard that as an oxymoron. I think there's women there absolutely is a way within traditional Judaism to really argue for the right and dignity of women to have this power. And and I think that when it comes to Passover, that it should be an every other year deal. 1 year he does it, 1 year she does it.
I have a quick take on this too. I've done a lot of work at Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico. Zuni is a matrilineal, matrilocal society, and at Zuni Pueblo there is the ideology that women are more spiritual naturally than men, and that women's skin when they're born is tehya, sacred. Okay? Men have to work on sacredness. That's why they have to do certain rituals that women don't have to do. But we don't have the downside at Zuni Pueblo because women own all the real estate. They own the cars, they own the houses, and men come and go in families. And so when like a Zuni matriarch, she'll have maybe 5 kids. They'll all have different last names because when they go to school, they're supposed to have the name of their father. Well, they'll have 5 or 6 different last names because they have no marriage hang-up. It's just sort of, it works as long as it works. And when all the real estate is owned by women, there's no trauma. The kids are never moved. They're in their family, and they have this whole thing about their being tehya, and they're respected, and they don't have the masculinist overlay. So, and this was, when I went as a young person to Zuni, I couldn't believe it. I had never been in a culture like that, where they said that women are valuable and spiritual and they didn't do the other thing. They didn't then make them into nothing in the regular world. And the women have, to this day, the financial control of that pueblo.
Which would you rather be, a man or a woman, Zuni?
At Zuni, I'd rather be a woman. And the guys complain, because, when a woman's done with the guy, here's how it works. He's out, he's at work, and he comes home and he notices his gun, his favorite shoes, his books are on the front doorstep. That's it. You don't say a word, there's no argument, there's no legal divorce, they don't do that. You know, they have their own kind of ceremonies, and that's it. The guy understands, he sneaks into the house quietly, grabs other stuff, and out he goes. Where does he go? Either to his girlfriend if he has a girlfriend, or back to his mama, or to his sister. And that's it. And it's the end of that relationship. But the guys do say that the women have it better. You know, they feel it, they sense that, you know, because they're solid, they're secure. But they raise children who aren't moved. I mean, if women have the economic center, and if all the property belongs to women, but guys have a new in. They are out in nutria, they're out in farming communities, and they're setting up a whole patriarchy out there on the edge of it's wonderful to see it develop. You know, and the way they do it is because they're out there herding, and you know, it's all men's stuff, and so they get themselves out of the center where women control everything, out to the periphery of the village. It's fascinating to see.
Leslie Moore? Should we smoke more peaceful than the others?
I don't know. Native Americans serve in the military at a higher percentage than any other people in the nation. Yes. Well, it's complex.
Native Americans serve in the military at a higher rate.
Talk to you guys. Yeah.
Just, I think when you have the experience as a child that there can be 9 men and 3,000 women, and you still don't have a minion, and you still can't, you know. When you have the experience of looking down from the balcony, and you're a little child, and you don't even, you know, you can't articulate what it is that you're missing or what spirituality is. When you have that experience that you cannot walk into that place, it becomes extremely difficult to walk into that place. And I think, you know, and then various other things may happen that for some people it pulls them in and they live it the way they can. Other people it pushes them out. But I think that there's, for people with that experience, you know, and I know for me there's an extraordinary amount of sort of frustrated spiritual energy in a certain sense. There's a whole dimension that exists. And I think there's a lot of people who have had that experience, a lot of women who have had that experience, and it goes into, it goes into my writing. I'm a teacher, it goes into my teaching, and I've seen it in other people, the way that it moves into what it is that you do. And so it enhances all that. It does wonderful things for that. But there's still a dislodged, you know, there's still a hovering, there's still a sense that there is something that exists that you should be in that you can't be in.
You know, I'm going to be an apologist for Orthodox. I'm not. That's why I'm not, you know, because I do have trouble with it. That being said, I just spoke to my niece today, who was raised in a nice reform home and moved into a much more traditional community. And I see a self-esteem, I see a place of belonging, I see a strength in her that knocks me out, and she's not the only one that I've met in this place. There's no defensiveness about her. She is really in a good place. She's vastly more knowledgeable than I am Jewishly, and her husband just worships her. And they share the work. So, you know, all this being said, all that I know is that it's one of these things that really does work. It does work.
Well, but you know what I think?
Sometimes.
I think because I'm in the same boat. Our daughter grew up in a family not very religious. And she moved to Israel, and then she became very Orthodox. So of course, when you have not been very Orthodox, it's very difficult to take all this. And as a mother and as a father, it's very difficult because you feel excluded. So she's a singer. She's a musician, she's a singer. And of course, we said, you know, but how are you going to compromise this? Being a musician, being a singer, I mean, and she's trained at Indiana University and all that. And she said, no, that has nothing to do with my spirituality, with the way that I am still a singer, so she sings for mixed audiences. She has CD, she does all these things, but she has this, she says, you just have to understand that I am really observant, very observant, and of course, she knows more than I ever learned. Yeah. And, so it works. It depends. And with young people, I guess, it's different.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. One last, very, very important ritual tonight. It's called Happy Birthday. You're 20? Yes. And Gay brought a cake for you. So there is a little bit of cake for everybody. And there are books over there, so you can look at these extraordinary women's work. And I thank you all for coming. Please leave us your name and a contact, and we'll let you know about future literary salons.